The lunar diplomatic station was a jagged splinter of high-yield alloys and pressurized desperation, clinging to the vacuum like a parasite. Its rings didn't just rotate, they ground against the silence, rhythmic and merciless, casting shadows across the moon's scarred face like a forensic sweep. Inside the coelom atrium, the air tasted of recycled sweat and high-end filtration. Captain Jake Morrison stood at a rigid military brace that felt more like a locked combat chassis than a human posture. He was a sharp-edged piece of hardware in a room full of xenogrotesques, a sliver of baseline human basalt submerged in an ocean of bioluminescent neon and shifting alien filth. Across from him, General Rodriguez looked like a man whose shelf life had expired 3 wars ago, his face a topographical map of broken promises and tactical retreats. "You're volunteering for the Synaptic Convergence, Morrison?" Rodriguez rasped, his voice sounding like boots on gravel. 3 candidates already went into that meat grinder. They didn't die, they just came back with their neural maps wiped clean. Brain-dead husks, Morrison. You're being a tactical idiot. Jake didn't flinch. His heart was a high-frequency pulse generator slamming against his ribs. "The Xyloth are the only upgrade we've got left, sir. I'd rather have a fried stack than a dead species. I'm zero asset, no attachments. A ghost in the machine. Let me go see what's behind the curtain." Rodriguez started to growl a reply, but the atrium floor decided to shiver, a low-frequency seismic moan that vibrated right up Jake's spine. The docking bay portals, massive slabs of reinforced carbon steel, slid back to reveal a localized atmospheric disturbance in the shape of Karys-Zul. She didn't just walk in, she colonized the space. 8 feet of indigo-skinned, genetically tuned muscle that made the ceiling look low and the human race look like a biological footnote. Her skin had the matte finish of wet tactical gear under the flickering halogens, and her Obsidian Phalanx armor was etched with symbols that pulsed with a slow, predatory radiation. Beside Jake, Rodriguez's whisper was a dry, frantic hiss. "Strap in, Morrison. She's a walking extinction event." Jake ignored him. He was already hardwired into the violet heat of her eyes, a gaze that hit him with the weight of a kinetic bombardment. The formal greetings were a slow-motion car crash of diplomatic protocols and guttural xenoslang. When Jake stepped into Karys-Zul's proximity, the air ionized, tasting of ozone and raw power. He forced the Xylosian dialect through his throat, a language that felt like swallowing broken glass and cold rain. Karys-Zul tilted her head with the slow, lethal grace of a predator assessing a kill zone. "You're a pebble, human," she vibrated, her voice a sub-bass frequency that rattled Jake's dental implants. "A small, fragile bit of organic matter to throw into the convergence." Jake let a cold, razor-thin smile catch the light. "In my neighborhood, the pebble is the thing that jams the gears of the tank," he shot back, his voice flat and calibrated. Her eyes narrowed, the purple depths swirling like toxins in a vat. "Humor," she noted, the word dripping with bored cynicism. "A neural bypass for the terrified. We'll see if your cortex is as fast as your mouth when we start the hardwiring." The banquet was a neon-lit fever dream of incompatible biologies and high-stakes posturing. Jake sat submerged in the oppressive chrome and marble luxury, watching Karys-Zul across a table that cost more than a colony ship's life support system. She moved with a terrifyingly suppressed violence, her massive hands, built for snapping spines, manipulating the dinner tools with the surgical precision of an assassin. "Why, Captain?" she asked, her gaze pinning him to his seat like a target lock. "Why let us into your head?" Jake looked into his wine, the liquid a dark, synthetic crimson. "Because the rest of my species is too busy looking at the shadows to see the wall closing in," he said. "I'd rather burn out in the sun than rot in a basement. Aren't you worried about what a human virus like me might do to your pristine network?" A sound tore from her throat, a dry, rhythmic thud that was less a laugh and more a threat. "You're either a martyr or a headcase, Morrison. Or maybe just a very small man trying to fill a very large vacuum." "Name's Jake," he interrupted, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "If we're going to be neurolinked, let's skip the military formalities." Karys-Zul leaned in, the shadows of the atrium pooling in the hollows of her neck like spilled oil. "The link isn't a handshake, Jake. It's a collision. Most people get pulverized." She pointed a long, blue finger toward the swirling lunar dust beyond the reinforced glass. But you've got a certain jaggedness. Like you were built to survive a crash. Maybe you won't snap when the pressure hits. Right then, the station's alarms decided to scream. It was a jagged, high-decibel shriek that tore through the atrium, the light strobing into a rhythmic, blood-slicked red. Security breach, Sector 7. The comms were a mess of panicked static. Jake was moving before the first siren finished, the soldier in his marrow overriding the diplomat. Power core, he grunted, checking the load on his sidearm. Karys-Zul was already up, a blue mountain of indigo lethality rising from the wreckage of the meal. You know the layout? She asked. I know every crawlspace and kill zone in this tin can, Jake replied, eyes reflecting the red strobes. You coming, or are you too big for the vents? Her eyes flared with a dark, sudden hunger. Lead the way, Ghost. They tore through the station's guts, a two-man wrecking crew of shadow and kinetic energy. The corridors were shrinking, walls slick with condensation and the heat of failing reactors. Jake shoved her into a maintenance conduit, a cramped, iron throat that forced her to hunch her massive frame, her armor scraping against the rusted plating. A rat run, she spat, her breath smelling of cold lithium. It's a shortcut to the target, Jake countered, his boots hitting the metal with a frantic, rhythmic beat. Either we move or we lose the station. Your call, Mountain. She let out a low, guttural growl, pure combat high, and followed him into the dark. They hit the Sector 7 junction and found a mess of scorched tech and the hiss of high-output plasma cutters. 4 guys in heavy-duty environmental suits were chewing through the core's shielding with a frantic, desperate energy. Jake signaled a hold, his tactical HUD highlighting targets, but Karys-Zul didn't do hold. She exploded out of the conduit like a localized hurricane, blue and lethal. Jake cursed and started laying down suppressing fire, his pulse pistol a stuttering strobe of white light to keep the attackers off balance. The violence was fast, messy, and absolute. Karys-Zul caught the lead guy by the helmet, her grip crushing the composite materials like cheap plastic. Jake moved with a wired, frantic grace, putting 2 rounds into a second guy's weapon hand before pivoting to take the third in a blur of close-quarters strikes. 6 o'clock. The warning wasn't a shout, it was a neurospike, a jolt of violet electricity that fried Jake's sinuses. He hit the deck instinctively as Karys-Zul hurled a 100-kilo cooling block over his head, pinning a hidden 4th man against the bulkhead with the sound of a wet thud. They stood in the wreckage, the silence returning like a heavy, leaden blanket. Your combat subroutines are functional, Karys-Zul panted, her skin slick with violet sweat. Jake wiped blood from his mouth, his lungs burning. And you're about as subtle as a kinetic strike, he breathed. She stepped into his personal space, her shadow swallowing him. She reached down, one massive finger tracing the blood on his lip. The touch was cold, clinical, and terrifyingly intimate. Subtlety is for the weak, she whispered. You used my momentum. You used me as a meat shield. Jake met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the deep, toxic violet of her own. That's the link, isn't it? Knowing where the heavy hardware is so you can stay in the clear. Station security eventually swarmed the room, a bunch of guys in shiny armor who arrived just in time to see the cleanup. Later, back in the dim light of the atrium, Karys-Zul found him again. The trials are a go, she said, her voice a low, vibrating bell. You've got a certain durability. A stubbornness my people might find useful. Jake leaned against a wall, still buzzing from the combat stims. Tomorrow, he asked. Tomorrow, she agreed, her violet eyes burning into his with a new, dangerous focus. Don't be late, little warrior. The convergence doesn't wait for baseline biologicals. As her massive indigo form vanished into the station's shadows, Jake felt the weight of the coming link settle on his shoulders like a lead vest. Rodriguez appeared beside him, a ghost of old, forgotten wars. You've made an impression, Captain. Try not to get your brain fried. Jake watched the darkness where she had gone. Too late for that, sir, he muttered. The link's already started. The next dawn was a digital lie, grey light bleeding through the grime-streaked windows. Jake found her in the training bay, her body a blue blur of combat carters that looked like they were designed to break every bone in a human body. "The body is the hardware," she said, without slowing down. "The mind is just the OS." Jake stripped his shirt, the cold air hitting his skin like a slap. "Then let's see if we can get them to sync," he said. The training was a descent into a localized hell. Karys-Zul's mind didn't just touch his, it breached, a high-pressure tide of indigo data that sought out every trauma, every crack in his ego. Jake's neural walls, built over a decade of black ops and military discipline, melted like wax. "You're holding on too tight," she hissed, her face inches from his. "You're protecting a core that doesn't exist. Let go, Jake. Be the void." Jake gasped, his vision swimming with violet artifacts. "Hard to be the void when you're trying not to have a stroke," he gritted out. She smiled, a sharp, dangerous expression. "Then have the stroke. See what's left when the smoke clears." Every day was a grind. They hit the limits of physical endurance and then started digging. Jake watched her move, every gesture a tactical masterclass. "You're a mystery wrapped in a blue combat skin," he told her one afternoon, every muscle in his body screaming. She looked at him, her eyes swirling with a sudden, sharp cynical edge. "And you, Jake Morrison, are a short-lived fire in a very cold room. Why keep burning?" The link grew, a digital vine weaving through their synapses. He started feeling the heavy, hydraulic rhythm of her heart. She started sensing the sharp, jagged lightning of his tactical thoughts. During a break, he told her a joke, something cynical and human about a guy and a neural lace. She stared at him, stone-faced, before a sound like grinding gears tore from her throat. "That is statistically improbable," she said, but her eyes were bright with a strange, new light. "You're a glitch in the system, Jake." He leaned against the bulkhead. "Maybe. But I'm the only glitch that makes you laugh." The political noise got louder. Ambassador Chen showed up like a nervous corporate drone, whispering about preservationist factions and the fear of a trans-species merger. "They think you're a bridge that's going to collapse and take both sides with it," Chen warned. Jake looked at Karys-Zul, who was watching from the far side of the bay, her skin soaking up the dim light. "Let them worry about the bridge," Jake said. "We're busy building the foundation." One night, the link slipped. The safeties came off. Jake saw the jagged, toxic peaks of Xyloth Prime, felt the bone-chilling wind of a world that didn't want him there, and heard the ancestral screams of her people, a low-frequency dirge that made his teeth ache. Karys-Zul pulled back, her chest heaving, her eyes wide with a sudden, raw vulnerability that wasn't in the manual. "You saw that," she whispered. "I saw all of it," Jake said, his voice a flat, dead rasp. "The weight of the crown." She moved into his space, her shadow hitting him like a physical blow. "And I saw your desert," she said, her hand reaching out, fingers trembling. "A life of empty rooms. Why stay there?" The answer was cut off by a sudden, high-yield intrusion. The training spire shook as armed teams, a mix of human mercs and Xyloth purists, blew the vents. They were the fanatics, the guys who wanted to keep the species separate and stagnant. The fight was a blur of high-velocity kinetics and psychic noise. Jake and Karys-Zul moved like a single, synchronized combat unit, her strength the hammer and his speed the nail. When the floor was covered in blood and brass, Jake looked at his hands. "Guess we're officially a problem now," he panted. Karys-Zul looked at him, her eyes glowing with a fierce, protective radiation. "We're the solution," she corrected. "And solutions are always violent." The project was shut down, the bureaucrats retreating into their holes. But in the silence of the training bay, the air was thick with a new, undeniable pressure. "They'll kill us to save the status quo," Karys-Zul said, her voice a low vibration in the dark. "What's the move, Jake?" He stepped toward her, his hand finding the vast, indigo heat of hers. "Let's finish the link. Tonight. Before they send the heavy hardware." The run to the cargo holds was a zero-G nightmare. They floated through the dark among the massive shapes of shipping containers, two ghosts in a dying station. Karys-Zul, stripped of the gravity that gave her majesty, felt the terror of the void. Jake moved toward her, his hands guiding her through the weightless dark. "Trust the vacuum," he whispered. I've got your 6. She looked at him, purple eyes wide with a sudden, sharp fear. I can't feel the floor, she gasped. I'm the floor, Jake said, locking eyes. Focus on me. They found a hole in the station's heart, a cathedral of pipes and high-voltage cables. There, in the hum of the failing life support, they Saturday. Fingers intertwined, flesh and scales. Mind to mind, Karys-Zul chanted, her voice a sub-bass rumble. Heart to heart. Jake felt the first wave, a psychic bombardment that threatened to liquefy his identity. He didn't fight it. He leaned into the impact and let it overwrite him. The world turned into white noise. There was only the indigo heat and the sound of 2 pulses syncing up. Jake saw her life as a data stream of blue and silver. She saw his as a flicker of gold in a toxic fog. They merged, their names becoming irrelevant. He was the mountain, she was the pebble. He was the void, she was the spark. When the light faded, they sat in the silence, eyes glowing with a steady, lethal violet. The doors blew, and the hit teams poured in with their kinetics and their hate. But they stopped. There, in the center of the wreckage, was something that didn't fit their tactical models. Jake and Karys-Zul rose as one, their movements a single, fluid expression of a shared neural map. They weren't a human and an alien anymore, they were a new piece of hardware. The link is established, their voices said in a perfect, terrifying harmony. And your war is obsolete. They walked out of the room, the mercs backing away like they were facing a live nuke. The station, the politics, the borders, it all looked like glitchy code now. They stood at the atrium window, looking at the cold, indifferent stars. What's next? Jake's thought rippled through their shared cortex. Karys-Zul's reply was a warm, violet surge that filled his soul. Now, she said, her eyes reflecting the infinite dark. We show them how to bridge the gap. Their story turned into a myth, a techno-fable of the soldier and the warrior who rewrote their own code. They stayed on the station, 2 violet-eyed ghosts presiding over a new, messy era of merger. And in the quiet moments, when the rings of the station cast their long, predatory shadows over the moon, Jake Morrison would look at his indigo partner and see a mirror. And she would look at her small, pale companion and see a star. Because in the end, the Synaptic Convergence wasn't a diplomatic stunt, it was a neurochemical revolution of the heart. They had crossed the vast, echoing vacuum between them and found that the only thing waiting on the other side was a love as deep as the void and as hard as the alloys. And as they stood together, 2 silhouettes against the lunar dawn, the universe looked, for the first time, like a place where even a small glitch could rewrite the entire world.